All right, here we go. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you if you happen to be a new person, and everyone else. What's good? How are we feeling? We have a little bit of an unusual circumstance in which this is coming to you, only in the sense that in this moment recording, I am not alone. It's never really happened before. In fact, I can remember no other time in the history of the show that I have attempted to record one of these intros when someone else is in the room. But right now, I have a little girl named Annabelle sitting over there looking at me. And I have to admit, it's making me feel a little bit self-conscious. But we were just downstairs and we were very bored and we were trying to figure out something to do. And I was making lots of different suggestions and none of them were good enough, except coming up here and sitting here while I record this. So that's what we're doing. Do you have anything that you want to say? What, you want to say something? Come over here. What do you want to say? You want to say hello to the people who listen to the show?
Hello.
Okay, there you go. That's Annabelle, y'all. It's kind of nice. That's never happened before. Maybe you remember, some of you, I recorded an episode with my eldest daughter, Rosin, when she turned 7. And I told Annabelle that we will do the same. She doesn't turn 7 for another few months. But when she does, we will also record an episode. But Annabelle's here today because I waited till Sunday and Mom had to go to the grocery store and run errands and I couldn't find anything for her to do except sit here with me while I do this. So that's what we're doing. And it's very appropriate, actually, because this entire week has been very family-oriented for me. First thing is the girls finished their school year. And if you've been listening, you know I've spoken a lot about the girls and school during the pandemic. Well, I am so happy to report that I returned the iPads. Yes, I can't tell you how glorious it was, how good it felt to return those school iPads. And I know there's probably no going back, and now they're going to continue using them from now on. But at least they're out of the house. It felt good to return them. And other than the school year ending, this last week, I also happened to turn 49 and have my 15th wedding anniversary. So there's a lot of special and family-oriented moments for me. Also, lots of synchronicities and one really, really, really magical moment. But I think I am going to save that for the other side. Because today's conversation with Kristine Kaoverii Weber is a perfect prelude to the magical moment that I had this week. I was very happy to finally connect with Kristine. I have been aware of her and following her work for many years. We have many mutual friends, but this is the first time we ever spoke. And it felt like she was an old friend right off the bat. Probably because we share common history and I think a similar viewpoint on yoga and life. I should mention that she is giving away a free class to listeners of the show. There's going to be a link in the description, and we mention it in the show. So just know that you're going to have an opportunity to take a free class with Kristine if you want. But you will hear our conversation is very real, and I felt very rewarding, and I'm excited that you get to hear it today. Real quick before we do, I want to mention that this episode is brought to you by Podcast Premium subscribers. People like Fran and Simon Goss. We want to express our thanks to Fran and to Simon And to everyone else who has chosen to be a Podcast Premium subscriber, if you have been listening to the show and you want to gain access to the full archives, or maybe you just want to make a gesture of support, becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber is the way to do that. It's a choose your rate. You can cancel at any time. If you don't have any money right now, all you have to do is email us and we will give you a free account, no questions asked. But if you do have something to contribute, it really makes a difference and we are very grateful. You can find out about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber along with all of my other stuff, including my live stream classes and my teacher's call and all my stuff. Everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay. Is that it? Not really. I think there was like another thing or two on my list, but I don't know. I think that the novelty of sitting here while Dad records his intro has worn off, and we are once again officially bored. So I think we're going to leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side. But for now, let's get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Kristine Kaoverii Weber. Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Kristine.
Hi, Jay. How are you?
I'm doing okay, all things considered.
Yes. I
How are you?
understand that.
How are you?
That's a pretty good description for me too.
It's kind of my go-to when I need to hedge a little.
I understand. I understand, and remain honest, but not want to start a long conversation around that.
Yeah, or maybe it's just not the right moment to get into it right now. But I try to not have it be just I'm fine or whatever.
Right.
Honest answer. And it's good to speak with you. We've never spoken before. I don't believe we've ever met, have we? No, we haven't met before in person ever.
No, I think we've had a couple of moments and it was years ago on social media, but I know I've never talked to you. So thank you for inviting me to speak with you.
No, it's really my pleasure to speak with you. And I appreciate you giving me your time. I know, especially I was even hesitant. I had thought to try to get in contact with you before you made the leap back, but you're already back. How long have you been back from New Zealand?
Since Saturday. So it's four and a half days, 5 days. Yeah.
Okay. So how are you doing? I mean, is there a jet lag? I can't remember. It's usually for me, it's going one way or the other that I get slammed.
I always experience jet lag. And right now I feel like I can't feel my feet on the ground. Literally. It's very interesting, actually. I feel like part of my mind is like hovering over some Pacific island somewhere, kind of on its way to the vortex that Asheville sucked me back into. So,
well, you know what you mean. There is something. I did a lot of traveling over the last 2 years before the pandemic. That is, of course. And there's something almost metaphysical when you get on a plane and go to the other side of the planet.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Yeah. And also heard from, the tradition says that you burn your karmas, you burn your samskaras as you travel. And there's no doubt in my mind that's part of the process.
Well, that makes sense to me too, because not always for work, but other times in my life where I have traveled, even when I do work, there's something about when you remove yourself from your usual external identifications and definitions of who you are or what you are, and you're in like some totally other place and some totally other context, all that's left is you without those identifications and definitions in certain ways.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I learned that very early because I moved to Japan when I was 25, just kind of up and moved. And that was not for a particular like studies or boyfriend, or you just said Japan. Why Japan? So that was back in the early 90s when you could go to Japan and teach English. We can still do it, but back then it was, people called it the bank. They would go teach English and then travel. And so I wanted to travel. My friend Maria, who just passed away, Maria Kirsten.
Oh, gosh, yes.
We were very close, and we went to college together, actually. So Maria and I would always dream. We were in grad school together, and we'd always be dreaming about traveling and talking about where we were going to go, and we finished, and so I went to San Francisco. That was my travel. And she went to Long Island. And, so we both had no money or capacity to travel. But then Maria and Michael got together. And I was her husband who, she just left. Anyway, they traveled a lot. So I'd be getting letters from them. That was back in the epistolary times, when you got letters. So
letters in the mail. Oh, my God.
And just talking about all her travels. And I was like, I got to go. And so I worked for a couple of years in San Francisco I was a reporter. I say journalist, and people are like, you were a reporter. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I was writing for a newspaper. And and at that time, I literally made beans and rice and made my own bread and ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches just so I could save enough money to get a plane ticket to Japan. And I got my ticket. I got to Japan. I have a master's degree in literature, so it was super easy for me to get really good jobs. And I worked for a couple of years, and I actually studied Japanese. I became pretty good at the time. And then, and that's where it's exactly what you're saying. Like, I shed my identity of my youth, and it was so powerful. And I think that was why I was really open and ready to embrace the yoga path and commit at that time in my life. And your Saturn's returning around that time, 27, 28.
It all comes together or falls apart, or
Exactly. So
what else? Just to interject for a moment, it struck me because I met Maria in Japan.
I know you did. Yeah, she told me.
We both taught through Yoga Generation, and our translator, Tomoko, shout out to her if she hears this. She has come to dinner together, and I've been so sad to hear of her passing.
Oh, I know. It's tragic. And, she interviewed me on her podcast. That was the last time I talked to her. And then it was apparently a very aggressive cancer. I don't know a lot of the details, but that's what I heard. And she was gone really fast. So, it was such a shock and such a great loss to the yoga world, because Maria she was the real deal. I mean, she sure
was.
Mm-hmm. And I've known her since she was young, very young, and she's always been the same person, very authentic, and you knew exactly what you had with Maria. She was right there. And she was just phenomenal and such a well-loved teacher. So it's a real tragedy when someone gets taken so young. Not that we haven't had enough tragedy this year, right? But that was really hard for me personally. And I think for a lot of people, and certainly her family and her students.
Yes. Her co-host Shara and I, she's in my teacher's class. And so I know it's hit everybody really hard. It's such a tragedy. My condolences to you and to everybody else who was closer to her. But it is interesting to get back to where we were. You were in Japan, you shed your identity, and then you said it kind of opened you up to yoga path. And that was true for me. Like, when I needed to figure out who I was or which direction I wanted to go, yoga became kind of like a vehicle for me to do that. Mm. And I'm curious, you went from Japan back to San Francisco, or where did you go? And
no, I was in Japan for 2 years, and then I traveled around for 2 years. I got to do my thing, that I had really wanted to. So I spent several months in Southeast Asia, and then I went to, where did I go afterwards? Then I went to Nepal for a couple of months and did the trekking. And then I was in India for about 6 months, and then to China and Mongolia. So I really got around. And then I landed in New Jersey, well, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where my parents lived at the time. And then over in New Jersey, not too far from you, I was in Frenchtown for a number of years, which is just down the road from you, right? Aren't you in Allentown?
I'm in Easton right now. I used to have a space in Allentown, but I live in Easton.
Right. So just down the river. I lived on that beautiful river, right on the river, and it was gorgeous. And then I met my husband and we moved to Asheville in 2001. So I came back and, and when I landed in New Jersey, I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. And I knew, I was applying for jobs in New York and some of my previous interests, which had been writing and journalism and also women's issues. So I was looking at a lot of things in New York and I wasn't getting any calls or anything. And finally one day I was sitting and meditating. And I said, the only thing I want to really do is teach yoga and do body work and study healing arts. So I started studying homeopathy and I studied more body work. I had studied a lot out in California.
I saw that you had like a book on self-massage out at one point. Isn't that right?
Yeah. I read that I was finishing it up a couple of days before my son was born. So I've been working on some other book projects. So you get so busy training yoga teachers and everything that it's hard to stop and write. So that was one of the reasons. I know exactly
what you mean. And I also think it's been hard to find some inspiration to write these days. But in any case, I guess what I'm curious about is that you said that you decided you wanted to teach yoga, but where along the path of these other pursuits before you decided that did yoga become a thing for you? Like,
yoga. I did yoga with Maria at her wedding. So I've been doing yoga for a long time. Maria and I started doing yoga in college together. And that was back in the late 80s when, it was aerobic studios were everywhere and people were wearing the big hair and the high thigh leotards. And Maria would drag me to yoga we went to Georgetown University. She'd take me to yoga up in the field house. There were no yoga mats then. That was before yoga mats. We had a big navy blue smelly wrestling mat that everybody did yoga. And there was a real Swami. I have no idea where this guy, I had no context for it at the time, because I hadn't been to India. I didn't know anything about the philosophy. But we had a real Swami teaching us. And he would say things like, okay, now contract your anus. And we'd be like, oh my God. What are we doing? And, so I was doing yoga then. And actually I was introduced to yoga by my 6th grade social studies teacher, Miss Gale, who taught us every Wednesday. We did yoga at the end of the day for a good 30 to 45 minutes. This was long, pretty long classes for ADD 12-year-olds. And, she had us, go through postures and then we would do Shavasana. And she always did some kind of a yoga nidra too. And she took us, how you do the counting in yoga nidra. Sometimes she'd take us through these visualizations and these countings. And I remember I was 12 years old and I vividly remember being out of my body and being like, whoa, I've never experienced this before. And I had no context or language to describe what I was experiencing. Needed it, So, and I still use some of the things I learned in that class, 40 something years ago. So
those early seeds get planted deep, don't they?
They really do. And I think it's so important for kids because the school system is so focused on this external technology, external learning. Everything is outside of ourselves. And yet there's this whole universe within that we culturally don't really teach our children about, not in any sort of methodical, and real way. We might say here, do some mindfulness, and that's very recent. And there's nothing wrong with mindfulness, by the way. I don't mean to ban mindfulness, but it certainly is not. It's certainly only the tip of the iceberg of what's available in this huge technology that comes from South Asia. So anyway, going back to, that early seed getting planted. Then when I was in Japan, I met some swamis. I went to India, spent time at many different ashrams, took many different initiations, spent hours and hours meditating in the sacred grounds, that had been slotted as meditation grounds for centuries, and spent hours, at the burning ghats and in Varanasi, all that stuff.
You went there.
Fully into it. Oh yeah, yes. I got conjunctivitis.
I know. I did 3 months in India, and I thought maybe I'm not going back. There was a moment at that Saturn returns where I was like, okay, am I really going to embrace this experience? I had similar experience. I'm so interested to hear you say that about having an out of body experience. It's so funny, Kristine, because what I think of you is like neuroscience or something, because you often, I don't know your teaching so in depth, but I know often you've talked a lot about a lot of neuroscience in your work. And yet more recently, when I was reading your blogs, I was like, this stuff is way mystical. And just now you were talking about having an out of body experience as an early formative part of your yoga. So it's so interesting to me, because that's something that I've really been trying to reconcile. Like, I think I started out as it being this really mystical thing, but that at some point over the years, I don't know if it's just because of the way the market was or whatever, that stuff kind of became more on the down low. And like, I was just talking about functional movement and other things. Right. Not like messages from beyond. So I'm curious to poke you about that. And well, first of all, I'm jumping the gun. Where do you end up most aligning in yoga? You said you took many different initiations.
I did, yeah.
When you decided that you wanted to teach yoga, did you have like a particular approach or tradition or something that you felt most aligned with, that was the direction you decided to go in?
Absolutely. I mean, how can I put this? We have to be aware of the fact that people get triggered by the fear of things like cults or having their mind work, all of that stuff. And I'm highly cognizant of that in my teaching. So I am very, very careful about, yes, I spent a lot of time with some really trippy people in India, like really out there, and it was fascinating, but I never want to impose on anyone. So, when I came back, I had studied with some Bengali tantrics, really interesting stuff. And when I came back, I almost immediately met David Newman and Bobby Newman, who were teaching in Philadelphia at the time at Yoga, Yoga on Main. Mm-hmm. And it was a Vini yoga studio. And I went in and I did their classes, and I was like, this is exactly what I learned from my teachers in West Bengal. I have no idea where that connection is, but it was not exactly, but so similar that I immediately felt at home with Vini yoga. And I pretty soon started studying with Gary and Mirka. Mm-hmm. But I did some private stuff with Mirka, and then Gary Crafso, I took some workshops with him, but because his teaching he's hard to get to, it's not like
you have to, the personalities have to mesh or something.
Well, there's that, but his personality doesn't bother. I like him. I think he's funny, but I know what you're saying. But anyway,
I remember him at an earlier time where it definitely was that, but I also think he is very, like, I had, after we did the Desikachara celebration, I had a bunch of those guys on, including Gary.
Okay.
And so it was interesting to talk to all these people who studied directly with Desikachara, and like how different they all were. Like they all were teaching a lot of the same things, but they got different things from him.
Hey, I mean, Indra Devi, Patabi Joyce, and BKS Iyengar.
Yeah.
They were all his students, and it's completely different stuff, So yeah.
Well, I should correct that. It wasn't that they got different stuff. They got taught the same things, but in different ways because of who they were.
Yeah. And then they interpret them differently, for sure.
That's right.
So my teaching, I would never say my teaching is pure Vini yoga. That's why I call it subtle yoga. I mean, I was studying long before I met Gary. I studied Acu yoga with Brian O'Day and Michael Gock out in California in the late 80s. I had studied a little bit of Iyengar out in California. I had a Jiva Mukti teacher when I got back to, yeah, I did that.
We all did it. We all did the Iyengar alignment. We did the Jiva flows.
Oh, and don't get me started with Anusara, you know. I mean, that
you
was
did Anusara. I didn't do the whole Anusara. I learned the spirals, but I didn't, you know.
No, I never did it. I went to one workshop and was like, this is like the emperor's new clothes, and I have to keep my mouth shut because I can't believe what's going on in this room. And I just left, and, you know, but that was it. When I, you know, so you asked me the question, Jay, of like, you know, why did we kind of, or you were kind of referring to, like, why did we kind of move away? Like, why am I in the neuroscience chick and you're the, you know, and you're the
yes, well, first of all, just to acknowledge the Desikachar influence. I mean, that's what I would say. I think Desikachar was a very influential teacher, more than he's generally talked about, in terms of bringing a certain teachings that seem very specific to him and then his father, of course, but in a way that was very accessible to Westerners. Right. And to just follow where my train of thought was going was, you know, why did I get into neuroscience? Well, the reason, here's the specific reason. I was teaching about depression at the Mountain Area Health Education Center, which is the premier education center for health professionals in western part of North Carolina. And they had been very, very solicitous and really wanted my program there. And I work with mental health professionals, right? So I started doing this around 2009, and I taught a whole workshop on depression. And a woman at the end of it came up to me. She was wearing, I remember, purple readers. She was very to the point. And she said, that was fine. You know, usually after a yoga class, people are like, you changed my life, you know, but she comes up and she's like, that was fine. But let me just tell you that I really wanted you to explain the science of this to me. And that's not what I got from this. And I was like, oh my God, you know, the brain is like Velcro for negative experiences. So I just was like, I have to be able to explain this. So that was really a very important moment for me. So and then one student telling you they wanted to know the science? Oh, it changed everything for me. Yeah. And then a couple of years previously, I had been a little bit more chanty and a little bit more like into the devotional side of it. And I got slammed by 2 or 3 different students who were like, you're too culty for me. And I was like, what? You know, like it didn't occur to me, but you know, I came back from India wearing Punjabis and just like, you know, wearing the bindi. I was like totally into it. So, you know, but that's exactly my point. I'm going to jump in for just one second, because that's my point. There was a moment in there where that happened to me too, where there was always chanting, but then at some point there was this feeling of like people weren't into it, or or a lot of other classes were no longer doing it, and I still was. Exactly. And I think that was around the Anusara time too. You know, there was, and they were chanting, they were doing their invocation or whatever, but there was just so much hyper focus on alignment and place, you know, and like doing these crazy poses. I have to tell you, in the early 2000s, I felt like a complete loser in terms of being a yoga teacher. I was just like, I can't do that stuff. I'm not interested in that stuff. I really love to teach meditation and chanting and pranayama. I love all of it, you know, and I wanted to have these integrated classes, and people would come to me and be like, I used to come to your class, but now I've graduated. I'm going to that harder class. I'm doing real yoga. I've literally had people telling me stuff like that, and I was just like, I'm such a loser. And so I started. It's so funny, because when I was doing this stupid stuff in the very early 2000s, but come the mid 2000s, I made the same shift and then hit the same place that you did. And then it was all about trying to figure out how we could attract the people who were interested in it. And like, I remember when I opened my center, I was like, there will be no, like, there was all this list of words that were not going to be in any of our press materials. There was going to be no power. There was going to be no advanced. There was going to be no levels. You know what I mean? Like, no hot. There was none of that. And it was all about trying to carve out another zone, another avenue to take, and not have to play that same game or something. And I would suggest that you and I were early adopters, you know, or even innovators in the what's happened now, because you see what's happened now. And a lot of it is because people are older and wiser and stiffer, more arthritis. A lot of it is that. And a lot of it is the teachers getting injured and all the hip replacements and all that stuff. But also there's just
I would suggest, in my weird mystical way, that there is a shift in consciousness taking place and people want something deeper. And a handstand is not going to get you there. Like, it might make you feel good about yourself that you can do a handstand and you couldn't do it before. That's great. I would never take that away from anybody, but it's not going to get you to this deeper way of knowing that you have to get through stillness, and slow mindful movement lends itself to meditative state. And this is what humanity needs at the moment, in my opinion, desperately. We need ways of going inside and understanding that there's something deeper in there. If we're going to survive, we have to.
Amen to everything you just said. I think to the first point, just more people doing yoga for more time. I think there's been some kind of maturation process. I mean, sometimes I worry, am I just projecting that because I want that to be the case? And like, as soon as the pandemic's over, we're all going to just go back to power yoga, hot yoga. I don't know. Right. Maybe
and
a lot of
just
people will.
To clarify, when you say the word people, of course, we're talking about Western people in the United States. Like, I want to be really clear. That's who I'm talking about, because those are the people I work with. If I was in India, people would be like, yeah, that's how you do yoga.
That's true. We're talking about like the Pacific Northeast or whatever, right?
Right.
Primarily.
The Pacific Northeast. I like that. Did you make that?
From the 1997 to 2017 or something. But I also appreciate what you were just saying in terms of like the basic philosophy you just laid out very nonchalantly about like a deeper way of knowing or a deeper sense of knowing. And that coming through a sense of stillness and slow, mindful movement being a way into that.
Yep.
Amen to that. That's what happened for me with Deskachar teachings, basically. Like, I was doing a lot of other styles, but then having just inhale arms up and exhale arms down be the vinyasa.
Right.
The only thing left was like quality or like feeling, not like how much technique do you need to inhale your arms up and exhale your arms down? Really? Although there's lots of breath technique that you could play with, of course, but it just seemed to me that was the process, that slow, mindful movement affected my system in a certain way, which led, I think, to some deeper senses of knowing that I cherish deeply.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And so you're talking about from your direct experience, that pratyaksha, that perception of like, this is what my body needs. But for people to get there, they have to be resourced. They have to have some capacity for slowing down and being able to turn within. It's a whole societal shift that has to happen for folks. And I think we're seeing the early adopters now. But, for 50 years, it's been pounded into our heads that we need aerobic exercise to be healthy. We've got that message loud and clear. What's just starting to emerge, and there was an article from The Lancet last week, just starting to emerge, is we need these active, and mindful ways of slowing down. That is not the same thing as Netflix and wine. And that's so important for people to understand. Netflix and wine is not an active way of slowing down and befriending your body and developing those interoceptive signaling and
no, it is
understanding yourself better. It's not the same thing, but people conflate it all the time. They're like, oh, I go to the gym and I drink coffee, I go to the gym, I work out, and at night I have my Netflix and wine, and that's how I wind down. No, it's not. And the study that just came out from The Lancet said, cardiovascular health, it's not just about aerobics. You have to do, they specifically mentioned yoga. You have to do slow, mindful stuff and actively train your nervous system to go into that parasympathetic homeostatic response, and that's or place, and that's that's something that's very new in this culture, and people still don't want to hear it.
Well, in that comment you just made, you went from the mystical to the science in a flash, which is sort of what I'm curious for us to talk more about. Because when you were saying, "Oh, I've had the direct experience and I'm going off of that," absolutely, it's true. But for me, I also think that is like it's largely an intuitive experience. I mean, I guess I have information that I'm going off of, but it's interesting to me that some of those experiences aren't always explained by science. Can't be fully explained maybe, but at the same time, it's certainly interesting to understand what can be potentially seen in science of the experience. And you just talked about like the down regulation of the system and the nervous system. It certainly seems like that's what it became about for me. Like when it stopped being about alignment and being able to do poses, it was all about like how I felt. And that kind of meant the only way I could find my way into it through like a science was like nervous system.
Yes, and I teach about the nervous system all the time. In fact, for your listeners, I have a class that they can check out for their brain.
Yes, we'll let them know at the end that they got a freebie that they'll get to go to. Absolutely, you brought treats with you. We're happy for the treats, and not treats, but like an offering. I didn't mean to belittle it.
I hope it's a treat. But let me just say this: that okay, so here we are, you and I, and many people listening. And we totally value that intuitive experience, right? And we get it. And we know that that's part of yoga. And we want to share that. Sometimes it's like a little scary, because the science makes it feel better. But the reality that, excuse me, the reality here is that this mystical experience, this intuitive experience, is what human beings strive for everywhere. It's what we want all the time. It's the way that the universe is ordered, if you like. It's a universe of desire. And what we desire, we keep deepening that desire till we see the purest desire is that desire for oneness, right? And that takes me to David Bohm. And we wanted to talk about David Bohm a little bit, he was a physicist and a mystic. And so as he was studying, and I can't really explain physics, but I'll do my best I can, as he's studying these, these subatomic particles, he starts to realize that we are operating out of really dysfunctional, a dysfunctional worldview. Which our worldview is that everything is separate. Everything is distinct. We've reduced everything to understand it, which is useful. I mean, it helps to reduce things to understand it. But what we don't get is the wholeness, And he calls this the crisis of perception. We walk around thinking that everything is separate, but everything is not separate. From a level of physics and from the level of mysticism. And David Bohm talked to the Dalai Lama, he talked to Krishnamurti, and that's how he started developing his ideas. And there were other physicists like Heisenberg, who talked to Rabindranath Tagore to start understanding quantum physics. And so, we're not the first people that are making this connection between science and mysticism, right? Mm-hmm. We're not the first people that the scientists, the good scientists, the good physicists understand that everything is interconnected. And that's what the yogis have already told us. So, just going back to this idea that we do yoga as a way to regulate the nervous system. Is that really why we do yoga? Like, that's great. I don't
know. I don't think that's when I think about the reason why I do it, it's not to regulate my nervous system. It's like to feel into myself and have that sense of knowing and find direction and purpose through that in my life. Exactly. I totally agree with that. It's like, I get to have a regulated nervous system. And from that place, then I can look out and go, what's the meaning and the purpose of my life? And who am I? If I can ask that question, who am I? And I have some sense of it. And by the way, you can't get that sense of it if you're not practicing interoceptive practices. Mm-hmm. You start to get a sense of who you are. And when you know who you are, you know exactly what to do. It's just your life becomes an open book. It becomes very clear. So it's a constant process. If that's true, you don't really need to know about the nervous system to do it. So why, as yoga teachers, are we talking about the nervous system?
I think it's a way in for the scientific, materialistic oriented mind, which is everybody in the West.
Yeah. It feeds my intellectual mind so it'll shut up or something.
That's another way of putting it. Yes.
Oh, that's my mind. I'm projecting, but it's almost like if I feed it some of that, then it allows me to go to those other places of experience.
I feel like when you can have one foot in both worlds, that you're able to build bridges. And, that's what we need. We need these bridges for ourselves. We need bridges in ourselves. We need our bridge on a physical corpus callosum, and then we need our bridge on in terms of our philosophy and our worldview level. And then we need bridges to other people and our build relationships. So it just gives you that capacity to build it on many different levels.
Well, that makes sense. If the crisis of perception is the belief that everything is separate, bridges is the answer or something, to like bring it to make the perception more clear as to the actual reality that we're not separate.
And that's what yoga is about, isn't it? I mean, that's Advaita right there.
I would think so. Well, okay, so I want to go back for a second to you deciding to teach now. And when you decide to teach, you said you were in North Carolina now? Is that where you landed?
No, I was in New Jersey at the time.
New Jersey, that's right. Yeah. And so when you started teaching, were you teaching like Daskachar stuff? Were you trying to do the vinyasa flows and play the game and then be like, no, I don't want to?
Right. I was teaching Daskachar from the get-go. In 95, not with as much facility, of course, as I gained later. And when I did deeper studies with Gary, it really helped me with things like sequencing. He's really masterful. I haven't met anybody who can do sequencing like sequencing and pranayama are his things. I mean, he's amazing. But
it's kind of like a catalog. He has such a retainer of information. It's amazing.
He's amazing. So anyway, I started teaching right out of the gate in 95, and then I moved, and I was teaching in my friend's garage. And then I was. Where
else would you be teaching in 95?
I was teaching at a dance studio. It was fun. And I also, I started doing yoga therapy right in 1995. I got a job. I don't know how I got this job, but somehow I got a job at a nursing home assisted living facility. And I just ran all over the place and did some body work and a lot of yoga therapy with people, breathing. I mean, it was a great place for me to learn a lot of these, how things worked. So that was wonderful. I did that for 5 years. And then my husband moved here from New Zealand. That's my New Zealand connection is my husband. And
how do you pronounce that name for when I have to introduce this later? That middle name, I don't know how to pronounce it.
My middle name?
Your name, Kristine.
Oh, Kaoverii. That's my Sanskrit name.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Kaoverii. I thought it might have been New Zealander.
No. My husband's last name is kind of Swedish. It's Sculthorpe, but I never. So you can see why I never changed my name. It's like, sorry, honey. Mommy is not the name.
All right, sorry. Go ahead. So your husband got a gig?
Well, no, he moved here from New Zealand. We got married, but he didn't have a green card. So he went and got his master's degree in social work so he could become a social worker. And then so he was doing all that. I was working at the nursing home. And then we were like, we got to live someplace that we like.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.